You're righty there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things Oldhammer related, and welcome to another video from Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. This video is going to be the start of my journey in building my 1500 point Eldar army for the get together in October with Bring and Battle Wargaming. I'm going to go through some of the tactics that I want to be considering, as well as all the units that I'm going to be using and painting them up as I go. So I hope you enjoy this journey and come along for the ride. The first unit I'm going to be doing for my Eldar force is going to be a unit of Eldar Howling Banshees. Now, it is unfortunately not going to be these original Rogue Trader era models, mostly because I wasn't particularly paying attention to the eBay posting when I was doing it, and I just noticed that the ones I went for were a lot cheaper than these ones that were the Rogue Trader ones. I didn't realise until I actually received them that I've actually got these ones, which are apparently, after looking at the Lexicanum, 4th edition Eldar Howling Banshees. However, what I'm going to try and do is paint them up in a style that really does bring me back to the 2nd edition Eldar Codex, and hopefully I manage to pull this off. Thankfully though, when you look at the Rogue Trader era sculpts and compare them to the 4th edition sculpts, there's not actually a huge amount of difference between them. The weapons pouches have got a little bit more detail on them, and so has the power swords, but the major difference they have is that the 4th edition Banshees are armed with Shurieken pistols, whereas what I noticed when I actually looked at the heading for them in the Eldar Codex is they can only have las pistols as well as power swords. But that's something that I'll just get over by using them as las pistols and not Shuriken pistols. What I also noticed though when I look at the stats for the Eldar Howling Banshees is that they only have a toughness of 3 and an armor value of 4+, which means getting them into close combat, which is where they really want to be, can be a little bit of a problem. But once they get into close combat, they've got a beautiful thing called a Banshee Mask. And that actually, on the first round of combat, as you can see from the lovely little write-up they've got here, prevents your opponent from even attacking back in the first round of combat. So hopefully, I should be able to wipe out the enemy unit quite nicely with those. There will also be an Exarch being added to the unit, but she's going to come in a future video. My plan is to put them in the centre of the field and have them run up towards the enemy as fast as possible, probably using as much use of cover as there is available. Hopefully there'll be a fair bit. But Jason and Richard are really good at setting up tables, so I would imagine there's going to be at least something for them to hide behind on the way there. As long as they can survive to get into combat, they will also be having something to block for them, but that's to come in a future video. And like I said, if they can survive to get into combat, there's going to be a few of them. With those power swords, they'll be able to do a nice little bit of damage. With the Exarch leading them, she's going to have a few little bits. That's also going to be a future video. She'll be able to lend a hand, and with any luck, they should be able to mince whatever they get into combat. So now I've gone through a little bit about some of the stuff that could go along with them and what I'm hoping to do with them. I'm going to paint them up. So grab yourself a cuppa, let's go to the painting desk, and see how I paint them up to hopefully look like Rogue Trader or 2nd edition era Howling Banshees. Let's see if you think I managed to pull it off. To begin with, what I've done is base coat these Banshees with Tamiya's super fine off-white spray. That's so you can get as nice, bright, bony colour as I can. Plus, 2nd edition models had a lot brighter colour, so a black base coat wouldn't work so well. Over this, what I'm going to apply is some Ushapti bone. And I'm just going to put this all over all the areas that I want to be the bony armour panels, like that off-white. So it's going to be on the panels and anywhere that's going to be the cloth. I'm going to try and be as neat as I can when I do this and try and miss the bits that are red. You don't really have to, but I just like to try and be as neat as I can with my base coats. This is just going to go over all the areas except for the helmet, the hair. I'm not going to put it on the swords, and I'm going to try and avoid anywhere that I'm going to do red as well. Oh, and if anybody wants to know, the brush I'm using is my Army Painter's Regiment brush to apply the base coats for this. At least apply these base coats anyway. Once I've done all the base coat of Ushapti bone, next I'm going to go and do the wash over this, and I'm going to use contrast paint Skeleton Horn. The reason I'm doing this now rather than at the end when you would normally do washes, like when you've finished all of the base coats, is because mostly a lot of these slightly older sculpts, especially the metal ones, the metal casts, the detail on them can sometimes be a little bit indistinct. Now these ones are pretty good, but it can still happen. Like you'll have some where it's not particularly perfect. I'll try and find some on this one somewhere. So look, This one actually looks pretty good, to be fair. But what this does do is help you identify all the little details that are in these. So, for example, where you've got bits like that around the waist, where you've got the thin little cord for the belt, putting the contrast paint over it will help that stand out and will make it easier to paint in future steps. So I just work this contrast paint over the whole surface. You don't want it to be pooling up massively. You want to be using this as sort of a surface tint as well as a wash. And as you're doing it, it's a good idea just to keep double checking that as you're going around and making sure that you're not allowing anything to pool up or tea stain. I mean, we are going to paint over this, but you don't really want that anyway. Here's a good example of them. So around this is where this helps. It's around these ribbons or belts here. Doing this now can help that to stand out a lot easier in later stages, especially since we're going to be picking these out in red. It makes it a lot easier to try and pick these out without getting red all over these. The bone coloured cloth and armour that we're doing. Still trying to be reasonably neat with this. I'm not trying to get it over everything and all over the place, but as you can see, you haven't got to be perfect. Now that we've got that skeleton horde down, you can see that it's brought out the detail quite nicely, especially on the thinner bits, like there, for example. And on there, it's helped to detail that a little bit better, and around the back. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply Evil Sun's Scarlet over all of the areas that I want to be red. So that's going to be areas like her loincloth here, and have some of these, like any of these tassels done, as well as her helmet, except her faceplate. I'm just going to get this applied all over. I've got a couple of different brushes to do this. I'm using my Army Painter's brush, regiment brush, but I'm also going to be using my Rosemary & Co.'s size 0 to get into some of the thinner areas like this. And I'm going to try and be as neat as I can for doing this part, but it doesn't, it's not the end of the world if you make a mistake again, because we're doing this nice and early on. If you do get some red on it, you can either very quickly rinse your brush off and wash it off, and then you, without drying the brush off, use that brush to rub away and remove the paint that you've got where you didn't want it. Or you can very simply, because this is nice and early, leave it till it dries, and then once it's dried, go back over it with Ushakti bone, and then reapply the skeleton horde over that. And because we're doing it nice and early in the process, this isn't going to cause too many issues later on down the line, for example, when you've already started doing highlighting. It still pays to try and be as neat as you can. If you have to, turn the model around, make it easier to get to any areas. Once the Evil Sun Scarlet's done, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a coat of contrast paints Blood Angels Red. What this does is this is going to help to darken down the recesses quite nicely, but without dulling the colour off like using washes could, like Carabao Crimson. And you want to be careful with this because it is very easy to lose control of contrast paints because of how liquid they are. But if you do get a bit on the model again at this point, it isn't so much of an issue because we can very easily just go in and tidy it up, which is partly the reason why I'm doing it now. But it's not partly the reason, it is the entire reason. And again, it does help if you're as careful as you can be. Again, I'm using my size 0 Rosemary & Co for this. It's always good to try and practice good brush control, just because it's good practice. I'm also going to do the helmet and do it all over, but again, not slopping it on there so thick. We still want it to try and collect up in a little bit of the recesses like we've got around here on the side of the vents and around the little bumpy sensor bit. I think they are supposed to be on these Eldar. Don't panic when doing this because it is very easy to make a little mistake or get some of this on areas you don't want it, just because it is so liquidy. Once I've finished putting down the Blood Angels Red onto the Evil Sun Scarlet, the next colour I'm going to do is the green for these weapon pouches. And for that, what I'm going to be using is Cabalite Green. This is the one I can think of that's the closest to the colour shown in the artwork, or at least it's the one that I have in my current collection of GW paints that is closest to the original. And you've got the weapon holster around here. I'm not going to be picking out any of the runes or anything like that. I'm going to be painting these all solid green. And the only other part which I'm doing that is also this pouch that is on there on her hip here. This colour may take a couple of coats to get smooth over your base coat, over your primer layer of white. But don't worry about that, don't slop it on. Just go over it as many coats as you need to get a nice smooth coat on it. Once that's down, I'm going to go in with a wash over this area of Coelia Green Shade. I'm just going to apply this as neatly as I can all over these nice little green pouches that we've done. Whilst I'm doing this, I have a thought actually. I'm thinking of doing this obviously in what I would consider to be a very nice, clean and quick and simple tabletop standard. But what would your idea of a tabletop standard be? Like what level of highlights would you go to or something like that? Whatever your ideas are of that, if you'd like to, put it in the comments below what your idea of a tabletop finish would be. You know, like I said, how far you would go with the highlights, how far you go with layering, things like that. I'm curious to see what other people's idea of it would be actually. The next bit I'm going to do after the pouches is their faceplates. Now looking on the Codex artwork, it looks as though these have got a slightly bluey tint to them. So to do that, what I'm going to do, straight over the white primer layer, is I'm going to do some contrast paint, Griff Charger Grey. Again, I'm going to be as careful with this as I can be, so I only really want to get this on the parts which I'm going to be white. I'm going to be doing this colour. To work it in, it will help to accentuate the detail on this. And this will add a nice sort of a bluey tint to it. And from here, we're going to highlight up from that in quite a nice, simple, one-step way. The next colour I'm going to be using is Abaddon Black. For this one, I'm going to again be referring to the artwork in the Eldar Codex. And even though these ones are 4th edition sculpts with Shurieken pistols instead of las pistols, I'm going to try and paint them similar to the 2nd ed style. So I'm going to do these Shurieken pistols in black. I'm also going to do their mane of hair in black as well as the blades of their power swords and these sort of little energy pulse, I don't know what you call them, energy nodule bits, whatever you call them here on the end. And what I'm also going to do is any of the gems, I'm going to undercoat the gemstones in black as well, including if they've got any what looks like an insect for them, such as this one here on the chest. And just do them as neatly as you can by getting the black in there. And remember, at this stage, if we do make a mistake, we can just go back in and tidy it up. Doing the gems at this stage, base coating them black, will get us ready for when we're going to be painting them as gems a bit later on. With all the black done, such as the mane of hair, the sword's been primed up black, and the gun's been painted up black, as well as all the gems. Next, I'm going to do the metallics, and the first one is going to be Lead Belcher, which is done on only a couple of little areas. You've got a little grill just here on her face. We also have these tiny little grills just in here and in there. And then just behind her helmet here, we've got these, which I'm going to do a metallic, which I'm also going to do in the Lead Belcher. The next metallic I'm going to do is Iron Breaker. And I'm going to do that as a base coat on the silver surrounds that are visible on a couple of the gems, such as the one here in a loincloth. Don't worry if you get some of the paint on the gem, or as I'm doing here, paint over nearly the whole of it. We can go in with the black and just tidy that up after. And I'm also going to use this on the blade of her power sword. We'd like this to be a brighter silver blade. I'm also going to do these little gem style things on the gun here. I'm going to do these ones silver. Final metallic to be base coated is the gold, and for that I'm going to go back to the Vallejo's Liquid Metal Rich Gold. This is an alcohol based paint, remember, so you do have to use isopropyl alcohol to wash your brushes off, not water. However, one thing I have noticed now, because I've been using this paint for quite a while, is you don't necessarily have to have a separate brush for it. Only because the isopropyl alcohol does not, it seems, damage the bristles. Because I've been using this brush exclusively for it. I've not used it for anything else, purely because I was worried that it would damage the bristles or maybe damage the glue that holds the bristles in place. And in these, probably 8-9 months that I've been using this paint now, with this specific brush, I have not seen anything like that happening at all. So you don't need to have a separate brush specifically for these paints. When it wouldn't necessarily hurt if you did. I mean, in some regards, I might almost say it wouldn't really hurt if you had a separate brush for each thing. So like a brush for base coats, a brush for washes, a brush for highlights and, you know, so on and so forth, you know, specific brush for dry brush, which most people actually do. Just, if nothing else, because washes can get into the ferrule of the brush and will splay your brush bristles out, or can do. Base coating your models, no matter how careful you are, I find just the action of trying to get the paint into all the recesses and nooks and crannies is you will quite often find that you're just going to knacker the bristles, the tip up on your brush, and it can be very annoying. So it's a better idea if you have, say, a separate one completely for base coating, and then try and find a cheap one, something which I still have yet to do. I'm still trying to find a brush that I like for base coating that can either take a bit of a pounding, or when it gets knackered, it doesn't matter because it's relatively cheap. Just unfortunately, if I'm honest, most of the cheap brushes I've found do not have a decent enough tip on them. Mostly because it's also, when I'm base coating, I like to try and be as neat as I can with doing my base coats. You don't have to, but it is good practice to try and be as neat as you can. And it also saves time neatening up. I'm also going to do a little armband. Nearly there now, we've only got a couple of base coats left to go. One of those base coats is going to be the green jewels and the green eyes, and for that I'm going to be using Caliban green as the base coat. And it's just going to be these eye lenses here, as well as any of the gems that you're going to be doing around her body. The last colour to do now is these little brown straps. She's got a couple of them here, they're just on her legs there, they're on an arm there, and they're just a little noticeable around there. For that I'm going to be using Dryad bark, and you're just going to pick these out as neatly as you can. Like I said, there's only 6 of them over the whole model, so if you're batch painting these, then it won't be too difficult to find them. It is quite easy to forget them, so make sure you remember them basically. And with that, that is the last of the base coats done on her. So now she is ready for 1 or 2 little washes just to finish her off, and then it's on to highlighting. There's a couple of extra washes that we're going to do. And so the first one is going to be Reikland Flesh Shade that we're just going to put over the areas that we've done gold. This will help to add a nice rich tone to the gold. Because as much as I do really like the Vallejo's rich gold, it is a very bright yellow gold. So it's nice to add a sort of a flesh tone to it, just to add that sort of a hint of richness to it. After that is going to be a bit of Nuln Oil. There's not going to be a lot of this done. I'm just going to do this on the little grill here in her faceplate, there and there, just around there. And we are going to do it on the blade as well, but we don't want to do loads. We just want to sort of slightly darken the surface off so that when we add our highlights, they actually show up a little bit more. This final step I'm going to do is entirely optional. You don't have to do it. But I do find that it does help to add a little bit of emphasis to the armour panels. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking Contrast Paints Gore Grunter Fur. It's a sort of a dark reddy brown, and I'm going to use the thinnest brush I've got, which in this case is my Army Painter's Masterclass. And I'm going to try and, as deliberately as I can, paint this into the very recesses, just around things like her armour panels here that are on her body glove. And like I said, this is entirely optional. You don't have to do this by any stretch. But I do find that it helps to emphasise the armour panels a little bit when we're doing the highlighting stage. And it does look quite nice. So you can see here that it's just areas such as around her feet here, and areas around her armour panels there. It's got them just in there on her elbows as well. Like I said, it's just go around and pick them out if you want to. Now that we've done all the base colours, we're going to start by working up the highlights. And to that, my first one I'm going to go for is the Shakti Bone back over what I'm going to do as the cloth areas. So this is basically any of our body glove that isn't an armour panel. And where I'm doing this, you want to be careful to avoid the areas that you've darkened off with your Gore Grunter Fur. And just build it up over a couple of coats. You may want to do 2 or 3 coats depending on how much you've thinned your paint down by. Just build this up, leaving the skeleton horde in any of the recesses that you want, and the Gore Grunter Fur in the recesses around the edge of the armour panels. After the Shakti Bone's been done all over the parts of the body glove which aren't going to be armour, I'm going to go up to Screaming Skull next, and that's going to be done over every part that's an armour panel. And if you do want to, you don't necessarily have to, but you can if you want to, where there's a couple of little folds on the back. There's not too many, but there's a couple on the back of her knees. If you want to, you can pick them out with the Screaming Skull over the Ushapti bone. Two areas that you might want to, like around her butt. But mostly, we are going to use this on the armour panels. It's going to keep going around again. This is probably going to take 2 or 3 coats to get a lovely smooth coat on there. I'm still using my size 0 from Rosemary & Co for this. And just go around all of the armour panels, applying that until you are happy. There we go. And with that, you can see there is a slight difference. Slightly brighter armour panels. With this one, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to edge highlight these armour panels here with some Pallid Witch flesh. And all I'm going to do is just carefully pick out the edges of them, like this. And I'm still using my size 0 Rosemary & Co. Like I said, if you try and do your edge highlights as carefully as you can, but always try and do it vertically down towards yourself, you'll slowly find that it's a little bit easier to do it like that. And you're back, and that is done. After that edge highlight, I'm going to start doing the reds. But I'm going to start by reapplying Evil Sun's Scarlet over what we've done, and we're going to leave any of the areas that have been left darker by the Blood Angel's red contrast paint. And for the helmet, do the same, just apply a coat all over it, but just leave around that little jewel thing there, or the sensory node, I think they are actually. After reapplying the Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm going to go to Wild Rider Red and use this as a little bit of a highlight on here. So along things like this loincloth here, pick out a couple of the top of the folds. Do as many of these as you would like to go. If you don't want to go this far with it, you don't really have to be honest, because the stage that we've just done with the Evil Sun Scarlet does a reasonable job of adding a nice basic highlight. But adding this little hint of a brighter red in places does make it pop just a little bit extra. It's always nice. And then for the helmet, I'm just going to highlight the top of this little sensor node on the side of her head, as well as the rim above her eye lenses and the front edges of the little vents on the side of her helmet. Now that we've done the red, the next part I'm going to highlight is the green pouches. And for that, I'm going to use Sybarite Green. And it's just a matter of picking out the little edges of the details, like that. And here, just carefully pick out the Banshee symbol on the pouch there. I'm still using my size 0 here as well from Rosemary & Co. Look how I'm doing, looking pretty good. A little bit there. After that, I'm going to do the green eyes and the green gems. And what I start with is Warpstone Glow, which for the gems, I apply it near the bottom corner like this here. So you're leaving a little bit of the top of the gem dark. Essentially, when it comes to doing gems, a nice little trick I do is if you imagine the angle that the light's coming from, so if I do it on this one just here, so if we want the light coming from, say, that way, from the top down, then what we'll do is we'll leave that top corner dark, the darker green, and then we'll just do the bottom here, the Warpstone Glow, like that. Same on there, see? And for the eyes, what I will do is just basically paint as much of the eye as I can while still leaving that darker edge around it. And that. Next up is Moot Green. And for the gems, what I'm going to do is do a thin line of this just where the Warpstone Glow is, so just on the very bottom corners of the gems. And then for the eye lenses, I'm going to try and leave the topmost corners of the eye lenses the Warpstone Glow, as well as try and leave that darker lining around the edge of the actual lens where it connects to the faceplate. Final step of highlighting that I'm going to do on the gems is going to be some pure white, which I'm going to add for the gems a little dot just where we've kept that little black spot, as well as on the opposite edge a tiny little dot as well, a little bit. There you go. And for the eyes, I'm going to try and put a tiny little dot just in the top corner, like that. And we'll go around and do that on all the gems. We shall see what that looks like when it's done. And there we have the gems, giving a nice little bit of shine to them. You can see on the eyes as well, that little spot highlight there. We've got some around the back. A trick you can do when varnishing when it comes to gemstones and eyes is if you have some gloss varnish, put that over the gemstones or anything, and that gives them that extra bit of shine that helps. So now that we've done them, next thing we're going to do is highlight these little brown straps. And for that, I'm going to use Gawthor Brown. And it's just a case of picking out little edges of them there, just can make them stand out a bit. This is another step that you don't necessarily have to do, because they are so small and there's only, what, 6 of them on the whole model. But they're here, so I'm going to highlight them. And then there's a couple just around the side there, but we can't really see those. But just to help them stand out a bit, there you go. After that, I'm going to highlight the black. And to that, I'm going to use Thunderhawk Blue. For the hair, I'm just kind of overbrush it. What you do is turn the model so you can run the brush sideways across to pick out the bristles, and just have as minimal amount of paint on the bristles as possible, and just skim it over the hair like this, and you'll start picking them out. And just turn the model around as you can see the hairs, see the detail of the strands. Instead of trying to pick them out with the tip of the brush and deliberately paint them in, just try and angle the model and the brush so you can get in there. And the good thing is with doing this as well, that you don't have to do it amazingly neatly, because hair is something that isn't perfectly uniform and neat anyway. So if you have a couple of bits that are a little out of place, it doesn't necessarily matter too much, because it just helps to add to that natural look and of the wavy hair. You just keep turning the model round so you can get at any of the strands that you see. And then for the black parts on the gun, all I'm going to do is pick out a couple of the edges. This is quite a rounded weapon, so it's not got a lot of edges. To be honest, this is another part that could probably be left out if you didn't really want to. There are so few actual edges on this part, but if there's an edge, I like to highlight it sometimes, or most of the time. And a little bit just on the top of the Shuriken pistol here, even though it's got a curved edge. I'm just going to apply a thinner line as possible. Next up, I'm going to start doing the metallics. I'm going to start with Ironbreaker on the sword here, and I'm just going to use this on the top part. And if you get the model to the right angle, you'll be able to see where the edge has been sculpted into it. And we're going to try and do the Ironbreaker on the top part, leaving the edge. And I'm also going to do a tiny little bit just on the grill here, just to highlight that. After that, I'm going to take some Runefang steel, and I'm going to put that directly onto where the sharpened edge of the blade has been sculpted, like that. And then on the top part, where we've put the Ironbreaker, we're going to use the Runefang steel as a bit of an edge highlight, and that's just going to turn it so we can run the blade along the edge like that. I'm also going to use this Runefang steel to highlight the silver parts that we've done on the gun here, a little bit just on the top there like that. And I'm also going to use this Runefang steel to highlight any of the gold. So along the edge of the Shuriken pistol here, I'm just going to run the brush along the very edge of it, like that, as well as around there. And then we've got the gold hilt as well. I'm just going to run it as neatly as I can along the edge of the hilt like that. Pick out some of the edges. Pick out as many as you want, or as few as you want. And run it along the blade, along the edge of the blade as well. Let's not forget this side of the Shuriken pistol. And I'm also then going to take my masterclass brush, and there's a couple of the gemstones which have got the silver surround on them. I'm going to use this Runefang steel to very carefully pick those out. To finish the helmet off, what I'm going to do is apply some Ulthwan Grey to the front white part. Because this has a slightly bluey tint to it, I'm just going to leave the Griff Charger Grey in the recesses and just apply a nice thin coat of this over here. To finish the Banshee off, what I'm going to do is her Banshee symbol on her helmet, and I'm going to freehand that. For that, I'm going to use my Army Painter's Masterclass brush again. So it's got a very nice fine point on it, and I'm going to start with Avalon Sunset, and I'm going to line up with the centre of it, and I'm going to use this little sensor nodule here to mark where it is, and I'm going to go just above that with my first dot. There you go. Don't have to be in a rush whatsoever to do this. Now, thin your paint down as well when you're doing this, because it will help the paint to run off the bristles onto the model. Now I'm going to try and do a triangle here. Remember, the best way to do this is keep your paintbrush going vertically straight down if you can, so angle the model for it. And if the paint's not coming off perfectly, don't get impatient. Wash your brush off and start again and get some more paint on there and get going back onto it. Okay, and you turn the model round. There you go. Start of it, and then from the centre straight down, and using the point there to help line it up. Okay, turn it round, so we're trying to keep it vertical. And this one we're going to do about halfway, and we're going to use the bottom of the triangle as our marker. Okay, and then just a couple more lines to finish it off. And there we go. Now you can see we've gone a little bit over. That's all right. All we have to do is go in with a little bit more of our Able Sun Scarlet and tidy it up a little bit. There we go. Then what you do is, once you've got that basic one in, you can go in and carefully try and thicken the lines up a little bit. There we go. Then what I'm going to do to finish this off, this bit is also completely optional. I'm going to go in with some Uriel Yellow now, which is a bit brighter. And I'm just going to try and carefully just sort of go over the Avalon sunset and just brighten it up a little bit in the points. In there, you see we made a little bit of a mess. Go in and tidy it up. There we go. And then we have one Eldar Banshee symbol. Not perfect, but it's not too bad. A little tip that I haven't actually given before when it comes to doing the basing. This works for the sawdust flock that I use. It will also work for sand as well. And I would imagine if you were to use like the foam flock, this little tip will also apply. And that tip is that I put the glue on quite thickly, as you can see, not so thick that you're losing control of it, but it's certainly what you would call a good thick layer. And this scenic glue is, although I think it's got that sort of a latex sort of product in it, or whatever it is that helps it remain tacky even when dry, it can be absorbed. And what I do to make sure that I get a good layer of this sawdust flock on the base when I do it is, once you've applied quite a thick layer of it, there you go, like that, so it's right up to the rim, the edge of the base. You know, and I've really got it on there. You know, that's quite a good thick layer of it. When I put it in the tub of sawdust flock, what I'll do is do it like that, so it submerges in, make sure it's in there, and then sort of leave it just like that. And I will leave that whilst I put the glue on the next base. And then as soon as you've finished applying the glue to the next base, what you'll notice is when you take this model out of your sawdust flock, because the sawdust flock's absorbent, it's put on quite a thickish layer of the sawdust flock. Not so much that it looks silly and it's piled up on there, but enough so that if you're ever worried about the flock coming off whilst, you know, in the years that you're gaming or anything, the layer that you get is quite thick, and if you leave it in there even longer, more of it will absorb on. Just a little tip if you're using the sawdust flock like I use. And with those bases finished, that's the first unit for my 1500 point Eldar Force finished up. So what do you reckon? Do you reckon I managed to pull off that 2nd edition look? And do you even reckon that 4th edition models look alright for 2nd edition 40k? Do you even mind if you're using newer models for an older edition? Let me know in the comments below how you feel on that, and if you think I managed to complete that look and pull it off quite nicely. Personally, I don't think they look too bad actually. Better than the 3rd edition ones. I'm not too keen on those sculpts, but the 4th edition ones are close enough to the Rogue Trader / 2nd edition 40k ones to just about do it for me, I reckon. If you like the video, why not give us a like and possibly even subscribe and hit that bell icon so you get notified for future videos that I put out. And also, if you would like a commission done, Down in the description below will be a link to my website where you can look at some galleries and get a quote for any commissions that you may want in the future. So with that, let's go to the final reveal. And here they are in all their glory. Like I just said, these sculpts are pretty close to the original ones for Rogue Trader era, so they do carry forward fairly well, I reckon. The Shuriken pistols instead of las pistols is a little bit jarring, I have to admit, but like I said, when it comes to writing up a list for 2nd edition, I can either just write them up as las pistols and count them as that during the game, or, which I've had some comments on the 2nd edition 40k Facebook group, was that some people would actually allow me to use them as Shuriken pistols, just pay the extra point costs for them. Whether or not I actually did that would entirely depend on what my opponent decides to agree with or not. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't, just because the 2nd edition Banshees don't have Shuriken pistols. The nice and simple colour scheme I think really does bring me back to those 2nd edition era times, and it helps the models to really carry forwards and give me that classic vibe, as well as the addition of the always ever important green bases. Because let's be honest, it doesn't matter what environment your army is fighting in, if they're not fighting on perfectly green grass, it's not 2nd edition 40k, is it? And finally, I would just like to say thank you very much for watching this video. Stay smiling and keep the old hammer alive.